have Ahmeira there that you can see on the screen coming to us from UK. And we were going to try to have Dr. Raja on from Florida. Our technical guy's still trying to get him on, but we're going to proceed with the webinar. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background information first here. So this is on mitochondrial rescue. But first, ACIM is an online membership organization whose goal is to train and support healthcare practitioners in integrative medicine, restore hope to the hopeless, and empower the people, conduct clinical research and implement therapeutic innovations, create a global wellness care community. And that's the information on Dr. Raja. Received his MD from Rutgers Medical School, board certified ear, nose, and throat, and founder of Clear Sinus, an early adopter high-tech platform for minimally invasive in-office sinonasal procedures. He's partnered with several Silicon Valley biotech firms to improve prototype medical device design. Been an integrative rhinologist for the past 5 years with special interest in bioenergetics and mitochondrial function. Co-founder and medical director of the Mitochondrial Rescue. He's the first certified U.S. mitochondrial rescue practitioner. His tipping point was the increase in autoimmunity, allergies, and chronic inflammation in his young patients, 20 to 30 years old. And we're seeing that much more often than we did just a couple of decades ago. So it's a bit alarming. Dr. Raja believes that in the medical future, where all chronic diseases can be reversed, and I think that is feasible, is possible, but we have to have better tools, and what we're going to be talking about today is one of those tools. Background on Ahmeira. Lilia is a self-taught holistic health practitioner who set out to heal her autistic son and succeeded. She has over 20 years of experience in holistic healing with the thriving multidisciplinary international practice. She studied with Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt. She's the founder of Mitochondrial Rescue, LLC, USA. She is a public speaker, bringing new technologies to the forefront of practitioner attention. Her practice is centered around moving the chronically ill back towards health through activating their mitochondria. A disclaimer. ACIM, Dr. Lee Cowden, Lilia Ahmeira, and Dr. Suresh Raja, if he gets on, do not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment through this webinar. The content of the webinar, such as text, graphics, images, and other material contained in this webinar, the content are for informational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding the medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've read, heard, or seen in this webinar. During the presentation, please write your questions in the blue bar over on the right where you have the ability to chat. And at the end of the presentation, then we'll have Q&A time. So Anthony will change over to the other slides and we'll get started on the presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Cowden. And first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting Dr. Raja and myself to do this webinar with you. We feel extremely honored. I'd also like to thank the people who have come to listen to us this Saturday morning for giving up a little of their time, and particularly for their patience. We do seem to be having a few technical issues. I discovered this protocol and these methodologies about 3 years ago. And if anybody had said to me at the time I would be doing what I am today and the impact it would have had on my practice, I would have laughed you out of the room. But I'm so passionate about what I've discovered, and I feel moved to try and be here for every place that I can be to put this into the hands of practitioners, because it is such a big game changer for doctors and practitioners' practice, but it is more of a game changer for the people who enjoy these protocols, because some of them have been ill for such a long period of time, and this can make the difference for them, and for some of them quite quickly. But let's start at where this all started. It started in Russia in their space medicine program. And I need to introduce you to the first gentleman who started all of this, whose name is Vasily Vasilyevich Parin, who is very much regarded as the father of space medicine. As you can see, he has a very, very glittering career for many, many years. But unfortunately, in 1948, he blotted his copybook because he was asked to do something by Stalin, which was completely unethical. And Vasily Parin said, absolutely no way. And as a result of that, he was thrown in a Siberian gulag for disagreeing with Stalin. And I cannot imagine how anybody could put probably one of the brightest sparks on the planet to do hard labor for 5 years. But testament to the character of the man, he managed to do 5 years. And when Stalin was deposed, he was immediately pulled out of the gulag, given a new set of clothes, given the keys to his old office, and told to carry on doing his research. And this is where the story comes full round to what we are doing today. In 1956, he was made responsible for all medical aspects of manned spaceflight programs, which was then named the USSR. And this is where our story really comes to the foreground, because it is thanks to those programs and the bravery of some extraordinary men that we are able to practice the medicine that we have today, and we have the knowledge and the tools that some of us use today. So going through science and history can be a bit of a dry old subject. So I'm going to try and make it a little bit of fun for you. And for those of you who are listening, can I ask you that you're to be sitting comfortably? And I'd like you to walk a journey with me. I'd like you just for 3 or 4 minutes, no more, to close your eyes and to imagine what it was like to be the first man to go into space. So if you're sitting comfortably, close your eyes. I will tell you when to open them. And this is where this amazing story starts. And I'm going to help you envision this amazing feat of human exploration. So please imagine that today is the 12th of April, 1961, and you are Yuri Gagarin. You're a humble and friendly man with an easy smile. You're the son of a carpenter and a milkmaid, and you're getting ready to become the first human to go into space and the first man to orbit the Earth. As you're strapped into your space capsule and you prepare to make history, a few thoughts might be going through your mind. You know that 12 out of the 24 launches in the space program so far have failed. And right now, you are sitting on top of 140 tons of liquid oxygen and kerosene. Just 2 days ago, you wrote your death note to your wife and 2 daughters. 19 hours ago, in your final pre-flight medical check, your heart rate was a remarkably calm 64 beats a minute. It's a little bit higher right now. During the transfer out to the rocket, one of the engineering team suddenly realizes you haven't got any identification on you. So they grab a paintbrush and they paint CCCP on the front of your helmet, just in case you're mistaken for a spy when you land. Remember, we're still in the Cold War time. But anyway, here you are, chatting with the technicians, preparing to bolt the hatch closed. And ominously, the sensors all go off to indicate the hatch has not been sealed properly, and the whole thing has to be removed and rebolted again. Your manual flight controls have all been locked off, and the mission will be run on automatic or from the ground, because although you're very fit and have undergone a rigorous selection and training program, the medical staff and the spacecraft designers are not actually sure you will be able to operate the space controls under spaceflight conditions. A sealed envelope has been placed inside the capsule with the unlock codes for the controls, just in case there's an emergency. However, the head of the cosmonaut training has already tipped you off what the code is, because they're not sure in case of an emergency you'd be able to remove your gloves and open the envelope. The countdown starts, and in the next 6 minutes, you will lift off and accelerate to nearly 18,000 miles per hour. 4 minutes after that, the final stage burn will have ended, and you will be in weightlessness. The stresses that will be placed upon your body are going to be extreme. Now, your body works pretty well if you're standing up. It works jolly well if you're lying down. And if you insist on standing on your head, although it might be a little uncomfortable, it will work quite well under those conditions. However, in weightlessness, the heart is under immense pressure. Throughout your entire space flight, from pre-launch to landing, your medical data, heart rate and respiration, are being recorded and transmitted by 2 thoracic ECG leads. To land, you have to eject yourself out of the hatch from 7,000 kilometers, 7 kilometers in the sky, because they're not actually sure what the space capsule will look like or what state it will be in when it hits the Earth. You may now open your eyes. Now, isn't that the most extraordinary journey and utterly terrifying? We have to take our hats off and salute such a brave man. So I put up on screen now what that capsule looked like when it hit the ground. Absolutely terrifying. Thank goodness he wasn't inside it. However, what they didn't publicize at the time, and we have discovered from records, is that the parachute did not separate itself from the capsule as he was doing the final 7 kilometers descent to the ground. And it only separated towards the last couple of minutes. And those wires that you can see in the picture, he was still attached to, which meant that he was going through a G-force at times of between 10 and 12. And the vibrations and shaking that he had to endure were astronomical. So he's unbelievably lucky that he made it back. And this is a picture of the capsule now today in the Russian Space Museum. This pod on the right-hand side is how he was jettisoned out of the hatch window. So you can see, again, very, very basic and probably utterly terrifying. And here is the hatch, which refused to seal itself in the first place before he was about to take off. This is Yuri, the 19 hours before he was due to take off. These were the pre-med checks where he was recorded to be having an absolutely steady 64 beats a minute. They absolutely picked the right man for the job. I think most people would have had their heart in their mouths. Here he is being suited up. And here he is, as you can see, with CCCP on his helmet before he was about to take off. So following on from his flight and coming back, there were a number of other missions. They took place under Vostok and Voskhod series, where there are a number of space firsts, which was very exciting. And we have to thank the research which was done by Professor Roman Baevsky and Professor Vasily Paran. Roman Baevsky is actually still alive, and those two were responsible for doing all of the pre-medical checks and recording all of the data whilst they were actually in space. And one of the biggest things that they discovered, which is absolutely terrifying when you think about it, particularly probably for Yuri Gagarin, is that when you get into conditions of weightlessness, the blood empties out of your limbs and starts to be redistributed in the upper torso. And it is these specific circulatory changes which trigger the various adaptive reactions in the body. Now, I mean, can you imagine anything more terrifying? Not only have you just been shot into space, but then suddenly all the blood's draining out of your limbs. I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about. But from these other missions that led on from that, three very bright sparks. We've introduced you to Paran, Baevsky. There was another gentleman called Gazenko. They wrote their first paper, which is just 4 years after the very first launch into space, which was the heart and blood circulation in space, which was in 1965. And later on that year, Paran wrote another article in the Journal of Cardiology, which was the achievements and success in space. So absolutely extraordinary that in such a short space of time and so few missions, they were able to come up with published papers. These are the bright sparks who enabled Yuri to go into space. Here is Yuri in the front. Vasily Paran is on the left. We think this one on the far left might be Baevsky, but we're not actually sure. But those were all of the major bright lights who were involved in the space program at the time. So let's have a look at what they discovered. Well, they discovered that the autonomic nervous system plays an enormous role in our adaptation to stress. And this we absolutely know today, but this is where it came from. They also discovered that heart rate variability was indeed the best method to study the vegetative regulation of blood circulation. And the cardiovascular system is a big indicator of the adaptive reaction of the organism as a whole. Now, that's on the sort of the physical aspect of things, but they also discovered that when they put somebody into space for any longer times, that they would age exponentially. And what they discovered was, on average, some of their organs would age 8 times faster for every year they'd spent on Earth. So this is where they realized that any longer-term space flight would induce significant aging, and that was going to be a problem going forwards. Now, in 1966, bear in mind that's only 5 years after the first launch into space, Vasily Paran held the first all-union symposium on the mathematical analysis of heart rate variability in Moscow. And it's extraordinary. They presented over 50 papers. And considering the amount of time that they had to do that, it's amazing. One of the things that I think is also amazing is that they were at that time looking at how heart rate variability could be used in sports and in other areas of health. And it wasn't just then limited to space travel, which is amazing. So sadly, in 1973, Vasily Paran passed on, but his work inspired a whole new generation of doctors and scientists who continued to research into space medicine. And some of the mathematical equations that, if anybody wants to go and look at some of the papers that were combined, these 50 papers presented, I've seen some of them. The mathematical equations on here are so complicated. The squiggles on that, I have absolutely no idea what they mean. And so you really have the most complicated stuff being used to come up to decide how the body is. So much so that it brought about a mathematical model which we still use today. And this model was heralded in the 70s and 80s, and it looked at the state of physiological norm, pre-nosological state, pre-morbid state, and a pathological state. And you'll see from the next image that this is the chart that our Vericard machine puts out. It's very simple, it's very elegant, but this is the chart of those 4 states. Anybody looking at it, even the patients, when they've been through the system once or twice, can very quickly see where they are at. And it's very, very simple. And although it's very simple to look at, the equations behind it are extraordinary. I wouldn't begin to even fathom how they came to those conclusions, but then I am not a scientist and they are. So that's half of the story. The other half of the story is, how did they stop everybody from aging? How did they come to be able to have long endurance space flights? And this brings us on to the supplementation. And this is why I'm standing here today, because it is the most exciting methodology and protocols I have ever come across. I've done absolutely no advertising in my practice, and it has absolutely exploded. And I think a lot of that is because the patients can see what's going on with them, the results, they can see, they can measure it. There's no subjective, well, I think I might be better, or I'm not sure, or maybe I'm just having a good day, or I've recently fallen in love. We can absolutely categorically measure where they're at. The other thing that is very exciting is the protocols allow chronic diseases to move forward, because the body has the power now to do so. And the fact that we can link that power to changes in the heart rate variability is also very powerful. The last thing I think gives me a lot of confidence is we've mentioned a gentleman called Professor Bajewski, who was the first guy to do the monitoring of the cosmonauts whilst they were in space. But what we haven't mentioned is a gentleman called Yuri Nikolaevich Semenov. And after a couple of decades, they started to look at heart rate variability more closely. And it was Yuri Nikolaevich Semenov who started to build the first machines that were really brought about heart rate variability today. Yuri Semenov is still alive, and my husband was actually with him for a weekend in Moscow a couple of weeks ago, looking at the further advances that they are making with the VeriCard machine, which make it probably the most powerful and sensitive heart rate variability machine on the market, which is why we absolutely insist on using it, because we believe it runs circles around everything else. And the provenance, you have over 50 years of space exploration behind it. So why does it work? Well, in trying to put cosmonauts into space, they realized that they would age exponentially. And what they discovered was the human body needs 300 milligrams of carnosine per kilo of body weight every 2 hours to keep the mitochondria at its optimum. So let's put that in real language or in real terms. If you were to take over-the-counter normal carnosine, you would probably need about 500 capsules of normal carnosine to keep the mitochondria at its optimum for 2 hours. And that's for somebody who's about 75 kilos in weight. Now, a lot of this space exploration came about because not only were they interested in space, but the end goal is always pushing the limits further. How are we going to do a trip to Mars? Now, that takes a year to fly there, and it takes a year to fly back again. And based on the fact that the mitochondria gets knocked out above 10,000 feet and starts to disintegrate very quickly, the aging process of a cosmonaut would be about 20 to 40 years over that 2-year period. So when you think about a cosmonaut would be around 35 to 40 years of age to make that trip, they might have the faculties to get to Mars, but they certainly wouldn't have the faculties to come back again. And so therefore, the space program had to find a solution. And it took them nearly 20 years. They knew that carnosine was required to enable the body to regenerate, but they had to find a way of how can they keep it in the body, because carnosine will leave the body generally within 2 hours of taking it in, of swallowing it. So it took them 20 years to answer that one, and that is why we're here today and we have those protocols. So what are we going to notice? Well, if you give the body the power it needs, it can recover anything. I believe that problems are just solutions waiting to be found. And the big changes you'll see with your chronic cases, which are scary at times, not scary, they come in and you just think this is going to take a long time. They spent maybe decades being ill, and you don't want to be another person in a whole line of practitioners. And this is where these protocols absolutely make the difference. So your big changes will be in diabetes, cardiovascular issues, chronic fatigue, autism, MS and atherosclerosis. These cases will move quicker than you have traditionally been able to see in the past. And this is why I'm so excited about this stuff. So your patients are going to go, what is this going to do for me? And you are going to turn around and say, first of all, it's going to repair all your protein structures in the body. So your body now knows it's got a problem and it's going to be able to get after it. Not only is that, it's going to clean out and it's going to repair all the receptors in the body. This is huge. Half the people who've got chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, the reason they can't get better is because the body has got absolutely no idea there's a problem. And the carnosine changes all of that. The carnosine is going to resensitize all of their receptors, and it's going to encourage a much, much greater production of ATP. So now they finally have the ability to go forward. And that for me is probably one of the most exciting things going. Now, these changes will generally be evident for most patients in about 4 to 6 weeks. So I ring everybody after they've started the protocols and go, how are you doing? And if they're not noticing changes, then I will adjust the dose, and that generally makes a difference. So that's, you know, there aren't many things that you can generally guarantee that somebody is going to notice a difference in that short space of time. And these are some difficult cases, and they do. So that's, for me, it's thrilling. And the patients can understand exactly where they are because of the testing. Which brings me beautifully to Dr. Raja, who is going to explain to you in detail about the supplements that we use, why the protocols work, and a little bit more of the science. So welcome, Dr. Raja. I know you've had huge technical issues, so I'm thrilled to have you on, and I'm going to hand you over now. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ilias. Thank you, Dr. Cowden. Thank you for all the colleagues and friends that are taking time out on this Saturday morning to listen to us. We're going to continue to talk about carnosine extra. We're going to show this slide right here. This is very important because this shows us the difference between our formulation of carnosine extra versus L-carnosine. A lot of the studies that I'm just about to present to you in the initial part of the talk really is concerning L-carnosine. This study was done with our medical university partners to prove that carnosine extra does have complete penetration intracellularly. It starts to get absorbed at 30 minutes. It peaks in 2 hours, and it very slowly degrades over 12 hours, allowing a twice-a-day dosing. One of those L-carnosine pills essentially is equal to 500, one of our carnosine extra pills is equal to 500 of the L-carnosine pills that are out there. Additionally, they don't go in intracellular, whereas ours does. In order to have health, we need to have structure, especially our proteins. We need to have an adequate energy source, and we need to be able to transmit that information. They chose carnosine, the Russian space program, because it was a very pleiotropic molecule. It did a lot of different things that they were looking for. And essentially, once they decided on the carnosine, they went ahead and spent money on research to potentate it to where it is now. But when you talk about the biological effects of L-carnosine, it's a good cleaner upper. It's an excellent antioxidant for the free radicals, keeping the cell membranes and the proteins very functional. It is very gentle, but it is a very powerful chelator that crosses the blood-brain barrier. As such, it's able to clean out all those receptors that Lilius was talking about. The copper and the zinc, as you can see, will be more important when we talk about some of the neurodegenerative disorders. But again, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It does inhibit glycation. We know the problem with diabetes is we have too much sugar molecules floating around. And what happens is they attach to proteins. And when they attach to proteins, they disrupt the function of that protein. So not only does it prevent the attachment of glucose to the proteins, it also removes it once it's happened. Carnosine represents 30% of buffering capacity of our entire body. In particular, it's known to buffer the lactic acid, which makes it particularly helpful for maintaining the pH of muscles, very good for sport. The role of neurotransmitter, you will see from some groundbreaking research that was just released in July, that it definitely improves the information flow, the nerve signal transmission as well. And finally, it is anti-inflammatory. It just does not allow those cytokines to generate as much inflammation as it possibly could. Before we go further into the carnosine extra, I do Want to let you know that we are proud of our other products as well, but we are highlighting carnosine extra today. We have a stimino complex, which has beta glucans in it. We have a very strong 3 to 4 hour colostrum, and we also have our own CoQ10. Our carnosine extra contains the L-carnosine, of course, 125 milligrams, but it also has CoQ10, which of course is very important in electron transport chain. L-carnitine, very important for beta oxidation in the mitochondria of the fatty acids. It has vitamin E, the most powerful antioxidant vitamin. It also has some flavonoids as well as some polyphenols as well. L-carnosine itself is a dipeptide. It's a beta alanine and an L-histidine put together. It's made by our body. Its concentration depends on our age, more when you're younger, our sex, more if you're male, and diet. It does come from meat. So people who are non-vegetarians would have higher contents of carnosine, but interesting enough, processed meat now has known to show lower quantities of carnosine. Just like our soil is depleted, our meat is nutrient depleted as well. It's concentrated most in the brain, skeletal muscles, and heart. It's made in the muscles and brain. It's broken down by the blood and various other tissues. Therefore, the problem for the L-carnosine, not for the carnosine extra, has always been low absorption. L-carnosine has a lot of roles to play in disease. And the way that I want you to understand it, is that it really helps the cell adapt to all stresses, both internal and external. So when we talk about the diseases that are close to our heart, we always have to remember that the mitochondria is at the root of all energy production, and we believe in the mitochondrial theory of aging. So we believe that it's really responsible for aging in general if our mitochondria are not functioning well. Here we see the carnosine molecule with the beta alanine and L-histidine molecules. These molecules have been studied for over 100 years. We know that the carnosine itself is a good buffering molecule, so therefore it maintains a good pH in the mitochondrial matrix. We know that it enhances the activity of the electron transport chain, specifically complex 1, 2, and 3. And if you can enhance the electron transport chain, then naturally you would increase your ATP production, which of course is the molecular universal currency of energy in our body. And finally, it also helps prevent those mitochondria from swelling and opening the pores and maybe causing cell death. And if we can do all those things very, very well, we are protecting our cells. Autism is something that's very close to our heart. These numbers are astronomical. They're something that is hard to get a hold of. Those 2018 numbers are actually an estimate of what it could have been back in 2014. We now know that 1 out of 7 children born in the United States has some type of developmental disorder. That's really hard to swallow. Our children need some help. We want to help them. Here we can see overall, these are studies that were done with L-carnosine. Carnopedia is a very excellent resource, Karnopedia, of all the different studies that have been done with carnosine and all the different diseases. In particular, with autism, it's been found to improve vocabulary, language comprehension, object recognition, awareness. We would also add diet, sleep, mood to those elements. When we talk about the role of L-carnosine in cardiovascular disease, it's quite large, actually. It has been found to increase the cardiac contractility by 30%. This slide is just showing a rat study where they gave cardiotoxic adriamycin and they pre-treated the rats with the carnosine prior to the administration of the adriamycin, and we found that the cardiac function was greatly enhanced despite the cardiotoxin. And it does this by regulating the calcium levels, lowering your blood pressure and your heart rate, which is a function of the sympathetic nervous system. And also, it's extremely important in the also important ischemic reperfusion injury of cardiovascular disease. And finally, it prevents oxidizing of the LDL molecule. And of course, we all know that that's the fuel that lights the fire of oxidative stress in our blood vessels. L-carnosine and diabetes. We talked about the ability to inhibit glycation, but actually what happens is our proteins cannot maintain their structure. They're folded in a very particular way. If we have other things attaching to them, including the glucose molecule, it changes those folding characteristics. Perhaps this glucose becomes attached to the protein, perhaps several proteins attached to these glucose molecules. And now you have cross-linked and damaged proteins that are no longer functional. In fact, they serve as a source of chronic inflammation and tissue damage. And if proteins don't work, it's very, very important, because then we don't have our transport proteins, our hormone proteins, our structural proteins, our immune proteins, our enzymes. All those contractile proteins just can't work. When we talk about the role of L-carnosine in diabetes, we know that it can stabilize the blood sugar level. We know that it could prevent complications caused by diabetes, and it can even regulate insulin secretion. L-carnosine in muscles, we did state that it represents 30% of our entire buffering capacity in our body. So by doing that, it would obviously reduce muscle fatigue, increase strength and endurance. Carnosine extra is excellent for sport, elite, professional, Olympic, all of it, because it's not on the World Anti-Doping Agency list. L-carnosine as a neuroprotector and as a neuromodulator, very, very, very exciting. We know we have a lot of mitochondria in our brain, so it's no wonder that the L-carnosine can have a positive effect. It's vast in its breadth and scope. You can see a host of neurodegenerative diseases here, as well as neurovascular with stroke. We're going to go over them very briefly. I wish we didn't have to, but we're on a limited time scale here. This is a pretty complicated slide, but basically it shows that in Alzheimer patients, we do have a increased amount of zinc and copper in the receptors, and we are also subject to oxidative stress through lipid peroxidation. We also lay down a particular protein called beta amyloid, and as a function of this lipid peroxidation, we could produce some toxic metabolites, which we can see in the middle of the slide there, called acrolein. That has a carbonyl group. Just like the carnosine does not like the sugar attaching to proteins and reducing structure and function, it also does not like carbonyl groups or aldehyde groups attaching either. So it just cleans it all up. Okay, so it chelates and it anti-carbonylates in Alzheimer's. In Parkinson's disease, we know we are losing dopaminergic neurons. We know that there's another protein called alpha-synuclein that gets deposited in the neurons. The carnosine likes to break that down as well, but the main principle is that it inhibits the glutamate excitotoxicity that we see for these neurodegenerative disorders. In particular, in Parkinson's disease, they have actually too much carnosinase, an enzyme that breaks down carnosine. We don't really want that situation, so if we supplement with carnosine, it would also help these patients a great deal. L-carnosine in epilepsy. Epilepsy is actually the most common neurologic disorder, and by the same mechanism, it regulates GABA levels, so it's known to decrease the severity and duration of seizures. When it comes to depression, we know that depression has a lot of other symptoms related to it, including shortened telomeres and raised cortisol, and perhaps some mitochondrial age-related dysfunctions. But really what the L-carnosine does, it suppresses the stress. It enables us to adapt to the stress, improve our behavior, our thinking, and also just have a very good natural energy boost, which is something that really most of our patients, if not all of our patients, experience with the carnosine extra. And it does that by reducing cytokines. It reduces inflammation. L-carnosine and stroke, it is definitely a neuroprotector. If you have a brain that's lacking blood flow, and if you have carnosine in that environment, it would allow the ischemic perfusion injury to be rapidly reduced. And they did a rat study where they occluded the 4 major arteries, and they proved it with the pre-treated carnosine rats. We talk about alcohol and alcoholism and L-carnosine. It is a very regenerative molecule, so it actually helps build the liver back up. As the alcohol destroys it, the carnosine will build it back up. When we talk about L-carnosine and anti-aging, you can see from all these different mechanisms that we quickly discussed that obviously it is very much an anti-aging molecule. In fact, when we lose carnosine as we get older, we lose our ability to adapt and defend ourselves to any stressors that we might be exposed to. And we also know that when we give carnosine to a youthful level in several species of experimental animal species, we can extend their lifespan by up to 20%. Okay, so we know that carnosine supplementation may protect against neurodegenerative diseases and stroke. It enhances exercise performance and comfort. It ameliorates diabetes and its complications and protects heart muscle. So why wouldn't you take it, right? The reason you'd want to supplement with carnosine is to protect against the long-term ravages of aging. Once you understand that a well-designed L-carnosine formula does, you will realize the role that it plays in preventing and potentially reversing all the signs of aging in your body. And we're talking about everything from wrinkles to Alzheimer's. And if you'd like to extend your life in that way, we would recommend an optimized L-carnosine formula for you. And that's probably the most important thing that you can do to turn the biological clock backwards. We're going to just make a brief mention of our other mitochondrial rescue products, and then I'm going to talk about the exciting research that we have with all of our medical university research partners. Like I said, we do have a complex CoQ10 that contains L-carnitine, vitamin E, resveratrol, and inulin. We know complex CoQ10 has several functions related to mitochondrial respiration. It's one of the main redox components. It helps to activate uncoupling proteins. It's an antioxidant, and it also regulates mitochondrial pores. The colostrum is a 3 to 4 hour colostrum that we're very proud of. It has over 90 growth factors, minerals, and antibodies in them. And we find them to be particularly useful for patients who are suffering from developmental disorders under the age of 5. And we also find it particularly helpful for our overtrained professional athletes. The Stimino complex, it has the reishi mushroom extract as its main ingredient, very powerful beta-glucans there. It also has chlorophyll and copper complex, grapeseed, bilberry, lycopene, and lutein. It's called Stimino because it stimulates the immune system. We find it very helpful for preventing infection, but also for arthritis, inflammatory conditions, and even chronic fatigue. Now we're going to go to some very exciting research that was just published in August of 2018 using carnosine extra and done under strict medical university scientific standards. It was a 3-part study, 2 in vitros and 1 in vivo. We've been talking about free radicals quite a bit, and we've been talking quite a bit about how carnosine extra can really help us handle those free radicals much better. But what is a free radical? A free radical is a chemical species that lacks an electron. It has an unpaired electron, and all it wants to do is just pair up and get another electron. And in the process, it can damage anything that's in its way, including cellular structures, nucleic acids, proteins, and lipids. Oxygen happens to be one of the most unstable molecules in terms of forming free radicals. So we have here some external sources of what's called reactive oxygen species, and that would be things like ionizing radiation, pollution, stress, processed foods, 5G, whatever you would want to say. So when these free radicals come in, they damage the cell membranes, and if we don't have enough antioxidant defense systems to fight the volume of free radicals that's trying to invade, then we're on the wrong side of the equation and we get cellular damage. So this particular study, we looked at 3 types of mechanisms of neutralizing oxidative potentials. And we looked at the hydroxyl radical, which is the most powerful free radical because it can attack lipids, nucleic acids, as well as proteins. We also looked at the nitric oxide radical, as well as a lipid peroxidation. And what we found was that in terms of neutralizing the hydroxyl radical, it was very effective compared to the other carnosines that are out there. And we looked at the nitric oxide radical. Similarly, the carnosine extra, which is much better than the pure L-carnosine and the L-carnosine. And finally, we looked at the lipid peroxidation neutralization with the carnosine extra, and you can see it's just really just vastly superior in neutralizing the lipid peroxidation process. The second part of the study was the neuroblast cell culture study, where we placed the carnosine extra in increasing doses into a cell culture of neuroblasts or nerve stem cells. We wanted to see what would happen. And what we found was when we increased the amount of carnosine in the cell culture medium, we saw a very significant increase in the growth of differentiated brain cells, meaning oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, and neurons. So essentially, carnosine extra serves as a brain growth factor in addition to being able to reduce any type of oxidative stress that we have inside the cell. Finally, we did a mouse model with MS, or autoimmune encephalitis, which is a mimic of multiple sclerosis. Here's just the pathophysiology of it. But really, it was a 3-group study where they had a control. They had a control where they gave 2 capsules of carnosine extra, and then they had another group where they gave 6 capsules of carnosine extra. And what we found was that the group that were taking 6 capsules per day had less demyelinated areas and less inflammatory infiltrate compared to the control group. And that is something that is really quite amazing. We're extraordinarily happy to see this result. And the way that we feel that the mechanism happens is that oligodendrocytes actually contain the ability to make carnosine. They have carnosine synthetase within them. So we feel that, okay, it probably needs the carnosine to make the myelin. So we're making more myelin when we apply the carnosine extra. Additionally, the carnosine extra is very protective as it crosses the blood-brain barrier to keep the blood-brain barrier intact. So we can keep an intact blood-brain barrier. We really can't get any of those B or T cells exiting through a damaged blood-brain barrier, then causing inflammation, because the blood-brain barrier is better protected. Therefore, we have less inflammation. The last part of this study just showed that the carnosine extra is completely non-toxic in all tissues of the body. And in fact, carnosine extra has no adverse drug reactions either. Current research, we have a great deal of current research taking place right now. And this one we're particularly excited about. It's a metabolic syndrome type 2 diabetes study, and it involves 100 mice and rats and 50 humans. And what we're doing is we're giving the carnosine extra versus control for 3 months, and we're studying the glucose, insulin, leptin, and cholesterol levels after the treatment with the carnosine extra. And similarly to how we studied the antioxidant capacity before, we're going to be studying the antioxidant capacity again in these patients. And that is something that is happening right now, and we expect to have results in the early part of 2020. But things are looking very, 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 very promising on this front. We have some other current research. We did some research where we examined rats every 6 minutes over a 2-month period to see how they moved with a very sophisticated software program. And we had 2 separate groups, one that was treated with the carnosine extra and one that was not. Those results are almost ready, and I think you'll be quite pleased if when they do come out. We do have an MS questionnaire study. We have a number of patients that are being treated with the carnosine extra to help give them energy to their cells, and they've been sequentially filling out questionnaires, and we're looking to publish that very soon. This particular study is very exciting. The earlier research that I quoted was really for L-carnosine. We know how L-carnosine can enhance mitochondrial function. We just also know that carnosine extra can do it that much better. So for once and for all, we just want to investigate the effects of our product, carnosine extra, on oxidative phosphorylation, the actual ability to make ATP, the ability of a carnosine extra to affect the electron transport chain, ATP production, and finally on how it actually handles reactive oxygen species. So that study module, that research module is happening shortly, and we're very, very excited about that. And if we can prove that, we can finally have scientific and official proof that it is very possible to recover and improve the function of damaged and dysfunctional mitochondria. And we prefer to prove that through peer-reviewed scientific studies of our own, with our own product, and please stay tuned with that. We have interest in other areas of medicine, including mitochondrial diseases. We do have evidence of in male fertility of the carnosine extra improving the spermatogram of patients. We have some patients that have been on very, very high doses of carnosine extra with ALS, and it seems to be arresting their disease. And of course, Alzheimer's affects 30 million people. We really would like to look into that more carefully and in more detail. We're going to go to the next section of the talk now. What is mitochondrial medicine? Mitochondrial medicine is really how we handle our free radicals and how we handle our oxidative stress. We can see that we get energy by breaking down large molecules into small. In this particular case, we break down fats and carbohydrates to make usable forms of energy. And that form of energy is called ATP. It's made in the mitochondria and it requires oxygen. Certain cells make more ATP than others and contain more mitochondria than others, depending on their function. We know that mitochondria have a very important mechanism and a function of monitoring calcium levels in the cell. We also know that it's responsible for apoptosis, which means programmed cell death. If the cell is not happy, it's going to be happy because it doesn't have energy, and it's usually the mitochondria that shuts down the power plant, initiating autophagy. We did mention that mitochondria do produce free radicals in and of themselves, just in the process of oxidative phosphorylation. Talk about that more later. This is an interesting slide. This shows medical publications over the past 3 decades. And if you just look at the one inflection point that's all the way to the right, the human genome was sequenced and completed in 2001. And since that time, the number of medical publications dedicated to the nucleus has taken a pretty stark decline. And if you look at the mitochondrial studies that have been coming out since that same time, in 2001, you can see that we are continuing to study the mitochondria very, very heavily for a reason. Once again, health is equal to structure plus energy plus information. We know that in the process of taking glucose and oxygen and having our cells respire with those substrates, we produce ATP and energy, ATP and heat, and we release water and CO2. This is the cycle of life right here. And essentially, mitochondrial medicine is all about electrons. We get our electrons from the sun. We get our electrons from our food. We get our electrons from Mother Earth. So when we talk about energy in mitochondria, it's interesting to just think about a couple facts. Mitochondria represent 15% of your body weight, sort of like how your smartphone battery makes up your smartphone. Okay, and each mitochondria, they have a charge of negative 180 millivolts. And we have about 40 quadrillion mitochondria in our body. So that's 17 zeros. So if you do the math, every single human walking this earth is basically a walking lightning bolt. And how that is distributed really is what the HRV measures. Now, which mitochondria would you prefer? You would want the ones on the left. Okay, the structure is intact, the membranes are intact, it's taking the same amount of nutrients and oxygen, but it's producing much less free radicals and a lot more ATP. If you look at the aged mitochondria, the structure doesn't look right, the membranes aren't right, it's leaking a lot of free radicals, a lot of oxidative stress, but it's not really producing a corresponding amount of energy. In fact, it's producing very much reduced energy. So when we talk about mitochondria and cancer, we have to recognize that cancer cells, through the Warburg effect, undergo a process of aerobic glycolysis, whereas normally it would be anaerobic. And so they change the way that they respire, and they produce just rapidly, just much more, much less ATP than a normal differentiated tissue would. Mitochondria can trigger cell death, the so-called cell danger response theory. If the mitochondria picks up an external signal where it doesn't like what it's sensing, it might just say, hey, look, I'm calling it a day. It might open up its pores, leak out, commit suicide, and subsequently set up from mitophagy to autophagy, cellular death. If you were to think of the body as a car, the mitochondria would be your engine. The free radicals would be your exhaust. Well, what would the carnosine be? The carnosine would be your oil, just allowing all the functions of the body to work that much better with the oil circulating through your engine and all your different parts. Talk about the origin of mitochondria. We know that it's an endosymbiotic relationship. When the gases in the earth became less caustic and more oxygen based. But the thing is, at this point, what we know about mitochondria, is it really endosymbiotic? I believe that the mitochondria just might be in charge. Genetics, we know that the mitochondrial DNA is a circular, very fragile, very susceptible to ionizing radiation. It's only 37 genes. It doesn't have any histones wrapping around chromosomes, so it's highly exposed. It only codes for itself for survival. And the last portion on this slide is inherited maternally. We know that that's come under some recent debate, but that is what the current thinking is. Once again, we have to talk about cellular respiration in just a little bit more detail, where we're blocking, we're converting larger molecules to smaller molecules. And in that effort, we are producing energy. Glycolysis. Glycolysis is taking place in the cytosol of the eukaryotic cell, and it breaks down glucose into pyruvate. In the process, we gain a couple ATPs, but we also gain a couple of these NADHH molecules. These molecules are high energy molecules. These high energy molecules are mostly responsible for most of the ATP production that we make, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Glycolysis is an anaerobic process. We do not need oxygen to undergo glycolysis. We talk about Krebs cycle. Very complicated slide here. I just wanted to let you know that the Krebs cycle takes place in the mitochondrial matrix, and it requires oxygen. And at the end of a couple runs of the Krebs cycle, we do end up with a net of 2 ATPs, carbon dioxide, and again, a bunch of these high energy molecules, 2 of these FADH2s and 6 of these NADHHs. That's where you get your energy from. And what happens in the next portion of cellular respiration is called oxidative phosphorylation. And this also takes place in the mitochondria, but it actually takes place in the inner mitochondrial membrane. And what happens is these high energy molecules come to interact with the inner mitochondrial membrane, and they donate their electrons, their charged electrons, and they travel through a series of complexes known as the electron transport chain. And in the process, these complexes release hydrogen into the intermembranous space between the inner and outer mitochondrial membrane. And they build up an enormous gradient because these hydrogen ions, they really are not permeable to the inner mitochondrial membrane. They can't go back to where they came from. So as these electrons travel along the electron transport chain, they are finally accepted at the end of the electron transport chain by oxygen and a couple protons to produce hydrogen. If this system does not work as well, we get leaking electrons, we get reactive oxygen species, and we get oxidative stress. Once we get to the ATP synthase molecule all the way to the right, and if anyone's ever seen a video of how the ATP synthase molecule works, it's really just quite amazing. What happens, this is the only way the hydrogen can get back into the mitochondrial matrix. It's actually forced through little tunnels in the ATP synthase. It creates an energetic reaction that results in the phosphate, the high energy phosphate bonds, attaching to the adenosine inside the mitochondrial matrix to produce the ATP. We're going to talk about free radicals one more time. Free radicals represent chemical species with an unpaired electron. We do make them from our own processes, such as oxidative phosphorylation, but we can also have a generation of free radicals from ionizing radiation, inflammation, heavy metals, drugs, things of that nature. And if you see at the very top there, we have a nice molecular oxygen molecule. Well, that requires two pairs of electrons, so 4 electrons, in order to be reduced to water. Okay, if something is gaining electrons, it's becoming reduced. If something is losing electrons, it's becoming oxidized. And really, I think we're entering a stage of medicine where we really should be calling it redox medicine, because we really want to be on the right side of the gradient. So what happens here, if this electron picks up, if this oxygen molecule picks up 1 electron or 2 or 3, that's not enough. They still have unpaired electrons here. So they end up forming free radicals, or reactive oxygen species. So here's the free radical theory of human aging. This is what we've been leading toward. We know if we have a chemical species that's looking to gain an electron, since it's already lost an electron, it can damage the lipid bilayer and cause lipid peroxidation, where all these electrons become very disruptive to the bilipid layer here. And now we have cell entrance. Once we get into the cell, we can affect the DNA depending on how strong the free radical is. We can affect the mitochondria as a cellular component directly, as well as other cellular components. And also we can have the free radicals even impact proteins right on the surface or even within the cell. If this happens, we get abnormal mitochondria, we get decreased energy production, we can't handle our oxidative stress, cells go through mitophagy, autophagy, die, and we age or we get sick. So one more diagram here. If we have normal mitochondrial function, we would generate reactive oxygen species. Okay, and as a result of that, depending on the amount of reactive oxygen species we have, and depending on the amount of antioxidant defense system that we have to combat it, we might be subject to mitochondrial DNA mutations. The circular DNA, there's about 5 to 15 copies of mitochondrial DNA in each mitochondrial matrix. And there's about 200 to 400 electron transport chains in each mitochondria. So we can see that if they're very susceptible to damage, and if we have damaged mitochondria and we have these free radicals, these unpaired electrons flying around, we can end up with some mitochondrial DNA mutations, which then in turn causes mitochondrial dysfunction. Therefore, it's making more reactive oxygen species versus ATP. We generate more ROS, we get more mitochondrial damage. We end up, again, aging or getting sick. When we talk about oxidative stress, it is a balance between our reactive oxygen species and our own internal antioxidant defense system. Once that balance has been breached, we can certainly have chronic diseases such as cancer, diabetes, neurodegenerative, and cardiovascular diseases. Free radical oxidative stress is, in our opinion at Mitochondrial Rescue, a root cause of many, many diseases affecting many different organs holistically: brain, heart, kidney, joints, immune system, blood vessels, lung, eyes, just about everything. Conclusions here is that if we have improved mitochondrial function, we'll have improved cellular energy production. We can tamp down the amount of free radicals that are being produced. We can increase the amount of ATP that we're producing to charge up our cells and give us energy. We can reduce and eliminate the amount of oxidative stress that we're exposed to. And ultimately, we can enjoy a nice state of health. Once again, I just wanted to show you this slide again, that this is what makes us different from all the other L-carnosines that are out there. Just a massive, complete intracellular concentration of the carnosine extra with a prolonged degradation. So one pill of theirs, you would need 500 of them to equal one pill of ours. That's it for me. I think Lilius is going to go over some case studies.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Dr. Raja.
You're welcome.
A huge amount of information to go on there. So let's show you how this stuff works in action, because it's all about the people we treat. It's all about making changes in their lives. And I have 4 very different cases here, which I'm going to go through briefly because I know time is marching on. And this just shows you the power of the heart rate variability methodology used with our extraordinary mitochondrial rescue protocols. So without further ado, here is this wonderful lady I met just over a year ago. As you can see, she's 70. Her atrial fibrillation was so bad that she was told the only option left to her was to have her heart stopped and restarted. Now, ironically, this lady in her day was a cardiac nurse. And so she was fully aware of the ramifications of this and decided it was not for her. She would take her chances. And she also believed that if she underwent that procedure, her atrial fibrillation would probably return to the same level it was within about 9 months. She could barely walk up a flight of stairs without stopping, and her day-to-day tasks were extremely challenging. In fact, life was pretty miserable for her. She didn't believe for 1 minute that the protocols could help her, but she also felt she had nothing to lose. And as far as she was concerned, I was one more person in a long line of people she had gone to. This is what her test looked like. And I can tell you that my heart was in my mouth when I saw this. So you can see here, horrible atrial fibrillation. This is the scattergram, which shows her arrhythmias. So you can see here we have 9.3% arrhythmias when the acceptable level is 0.5. And pretty serious. She could have checked out at any time. She knew it. Everybody knew it. And so for us, we had to see what we could do. We gave her a very big therapeutic dose. And basically, we saw her 8 weeks later. I tend to see most patients within 8-week intervals because the body takes time to respond to these things. And there were significant improvements. She was far less likely to have a heart attack. A lot of the horrible numbers had diminished. And amazingly, her arrhythmias had come down from 9.3 to 6.7, bearing in mind that 0.5 is an acceptable value of where we'd like to see her. And this is what it looked like 8 weeks later. So look at this clumping. So to remember the scattergram, I'm just going to reverse it. So look at this scattergram here. I'm going to reverse 2 slides. 1, 2. So that's what she walks in with. And 8 weeks later, we've got this lovely clumping. So also she had a total power. We're always looking at what people's total power was. Hers originally was 19,556, which shows complete and utter exhaustion. Those numbers do get altered, but it was very, very, very high. And in 8 weeks, we've brought it down to 8,432. It's still a horrible number. It's not where we want it, but that is an over 50% change. So again, very, very exciting to see. And you will see a lot with atrial fibrillation. You will bring the arrhythmias down pretty quickly. So let me show you what she looks like 1 year later. Her system has stabilized. She can now trot upstairs without being breathless. She does work in her garden. She was telling me she'd actually emptied out a junk room and repainted it. Absolutely extraordinary. And she's now 71. Her arrhythmias are now consistently coming in around 3.5. And when you have arrhythmias over 4%, it is recommended that you should see a cardiologist. So the fact that she's now at 3.5, she's no longer having to see her cardiologist quite so often. And this is what it looks like a year later. Isn't that absolutely thrilling? So look at this clumping here in the scattergram. So it's all coming together. It's much, much happier place. Arrhythmias, 3.5. So again, normally down here, when it's over 4%, you get a typewritten line that basically says you should see a cardiologist. That's gone. And the numbers are a lot healthier. She is far less likely to check out from this lovely earth at any time in the near future for reasons of atrial fibrillation, because none of the numbers are going to suggest that she's in a much better place. So very, very thrilling case to see. So next, we have chronic fatigue. This lady, 51 years of age, she suffered her entire life with chronic fatigue. She and her sister suffered from some very, very serious abuse when they were very small. Her sister was of a less strong constitution and could not cope with it. She had died a year previously. This sister was much stronger in her constitution and her state of mind, but she had tried literally everything. Her feet were on the ground, and she just wanted to get better and was prepared to try anything. I was one of a long line of people she had seen where nothing had worked up until seeing me. This was her first case. You can see she's got 333 power. We want it to be around 2000. She's coming in here at the upper end of everyday stress. Now this, when you see people with a long line of problems, you know generally is not correct, because it indicates there's a lot of probable receptor damage, which is why she's not actually been able to heal. If you look at the cardiointervallogram, you can see there's very little variability in her heart rate. So it's a pretty sorry picture. So we give her a good therapeutic dose and we send her away. And 8 weeks later, she returns saying she has never felt better. Her aches and pains have gone. She's got no brain fog. And in her words, not mine, she just needed the power to heal. Check this out. That is amazing. So she's gone from halfway across here as a 5, right the way down to a 1. Look at this power, 1700 power. We want her to have around 2000. She's gone from 333 to 1700 in 8 weeks. Her body still has a little bit of a way to go, but the pressure's off. She's in a much happier place. She's taking her life back. She's in control. And she's now on a maintenance dose. And her life is now wonderful. So very happy camper there. Oops. Okay, autism, very, very close to my heart. In autism, it makes some of the most fundamental changes. We find that most children have a complete lack of power, which is why they are unable to respond to many of the interventions that their parents are giving them. This boy, I had known him for about 3 years. He had never spoken a word in his life, and he hadn't slept a full night in his entire life. The parents were basket cases in the nicest possible way, as they too had no sleep. Everybody was traumatized. When they would come to me for an appointment, I would literally stand behind the door, take a deep breath before I opened the door, and then would be this complete hurricane of emotions and people coming in. And one can only have compassion for people in that place. So this is what this young lad looked like. As you can see, he has a tremendous amount of arrhythmias here. It's measuring 5.8. Remember, we don't want him higher than 0.5, and at 4, there's generally a suggestion to go and see a cardiologist. So he's in such a bad way, we can only get him to sit for just over a minute, which is not really long enough, but sometimes you have to take a decision that something is better than nothing. And that's pretty much where we were at here. So, and if you look also, he's got very low power in his brain area, but we'll come back to that later on. So give him his dose, send him away, and I don't hear anything until 12 weeks later. So I get to the door, I take a deep breath because I'm ready for what the sort of hurricane of emotions that's going to walk in. And this little person walks past me and goes, "Hi, Lilius." And I nearly fell off my perch. The parents looked serene, and I just said, "What on earth happened?" And he said, "He now sleeps," which is unbelievable. He started to talk within about 4 weeks, straight into 3- and 4-word sentences. And we do see this from time to time. And these sorts of changes are so incredibly rewarding. It's a dynamic that changes not just the boy's life, but the entire family's dynamic. Everything changes. Everybody's better. And one of the things that parents find it hard to come to terms with is when you get children who do start to speak, and it's not baby words or sounds, it is words. They suddenly realize that for the last few years, they've been treating that child as a very, very young person, when actually their mental capacity was probably around their age. It was all there, but because the child was unable to speak, he was unable to express himself, and they were unable to know exactly where the child's mental ability was. So this was absolutely amazing. And this is him, this is that test. Look at this lovely clumping. There are no arrhythmias here whatsoever. So by just taking out the stress on the heart, giving the body some more power, he's gone from 6.5 to, he's just flipped into a 4 here. Much, much better. Look at this. He was able to sit for 3.5 minutes. And that's just 12 weeks later. So a very, very thrilling case for me. And one to give hope to many, many autistic parents. So the last one is a day that I will probably never forget. We probably all have cases like this, hopefully not too many, but they teach us lessons. I do this because I care about people. That's why we become practitioners. And with this methodology and with these protocols, you will save lives. And you will save lives sometimes on the day that you see the patient. And it's very rewarding, but can be a little alarming at times. So I actually went to see this man. He didn't come to see me. He was a barrister. I went there for some advice. And I was extolling the virtues of these methods and the principles we do, and saying how very excited I was that the practice was exploding, and that's why I needed his help. And he got behind it, and he went, "Gosh, this is so interesting. I'd love to come and see you sometime." And I said, "Well, actually, I've got my kit in my bag. I can do a test for you. Have you had any coffee recently?" He said, no, not since breakfast. And that was a long time ago. And I said, "Have you eaten anything? Had any biscuits, morning snacks?" He went, no. And I said, "How's your health?" He went, "Absolutely fine. I had a full Bupa medical about 10 days ago. I was given the all clear, not a problem in the world." Well, when I show you the next slide, you will understand how much of a shock it was for me. He had absolutely no idea that he was at risk right there, sitting in front of me, of a fatal heart attack. Now, when you learn to do this and you learn to read the report, there are numbers which we call high risk numbers, which say that you are at risk of a heart attack. And, one number means, yes, you are at risk. You need to change your lifestyle and pay attention. 2 numbers, you really need to wake up and smell the coffee and get with the program, because your health is not in a good way. 3, it's not a question of if, but probably when. 4, it's imminent. And the highlighted numbers are all those numbers. So if you can see, it's absolutely flat across here. There is no variability in his heart rate. This is the scattergram. There's nothing going on here. It's like everything, the system has collapsed. It cannot go anywhere. He is a 9.5 here. And so when you get a situation like this, you have to act immediately. You do not allow your patient to leave the chair, although I went there to seek his attention. So I literally found some water, grabbed some pills, which I always carry on me, and said, "Here's a very large therapeutic dose. Take these now." And I kept talking to him for 20 minutes. The beauty about the carnosine extra is that it enters the cell and enters the bloodstream within 20 minutes of taking it. And I knew that within 20 minutes, he would be very protected and far less likely to go into a heart attack. And all of these numbers would start to change. The nice thing to tell you is that he is alive today. He's absolutely fine. I took this, you will not often see a case like this. And I took this report and I happened to show it to 2 doctors I was with a couple of weeks later, both who understand this system. And I said, "Hey guys, have a look at this." And they immediately looked at the report, looked at me, looked at each other, and in unison said, "Is this man still alive?" And I went, "Absolutely." One of the doctors went on to tell me a story that he'd had a few cases like this, but two he remembers in particular. One, he sent immediately to the hospital to get checked out, and the hospital gave him a clean bill of health. And as he exited the hospital, on the steps of the hospital, he had a fatal heart attack and died. Another one he sent to the hospital. They gave him a clean bill of health. He went home, didn't think anything more of it, and the poor chap was dead 3 days later. These protocols are so important because they can change lives. This man, had we not intervened, I believe wouldn't be here today. And we found out later that he was in the middle of the most horrific divorce. So don't ever underestimate what emotional strain can do to people. And by giving him these protocols, he was able to bring the stress levels down immediately in his body. And he's now absolutely fine, much happier. And his reports are coming in a much better way. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to hand back to Dr. Cowden and Dr. Raja. They have more to share with you, I think, on our upcoming training, which I hope this will have inspired many of you to bring it into your practice. As I say, we're doing a training in a couple of weeks' time, and Dr. Raja and Dr. Cowden, I think, are going to give us a little bit more information on that now.
Thank you, Ilias. We do have a training program occurring on March 1st through 3rd at the Florida Hospital and Conference Center in Orlando. It is a full didactic and practical session where we will be showing you more detail of the science that we went over rather than trying to cram it in 1 hour. And we'll also be doing lots of time with the machine. You can bring home a machine. You can have access to the products at the end of the weekend. Hopefully you'll be very comfortable. You'll have a full community support. You'll have your own distribution portal, everything that you would need to become a mitochondrial rescue practitioner.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I do want to go over a couple of things that we're going to be doing in addition to that conference here for a minute before we start into the Q&A session. So let's do that quickly. This is a webinar coming up on March 30th. Dr. Eric Weiss is going to teach us some more about stem cell therapy clinical applications. And they do save these dates. As Lilias and Dr. Raja mentioned, there's this mitochondrial rescue conference coming up March 1st through the 3rd in Orlando, Florida. That's very soon, about 2 weeks away. And so if you've not registered for that and you can't come, please go ahead and register. And then on May 23rd through 25th, we're going to have Heal the Healer and Stem Cell Workshop in Dallas. July 18th through the 20th, hands-on Heal the Healer Workshop again in Dallas. And then September 19th through 21st, we plan to have a stem cell workshop in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. November 14th to the 16th is our international conference for health professionals. And we're going to also have a simultaneous seminar, public seminar for in Orlando also, November 15th to the 16th. So do mark your calendars for those. Very soon, we should have that information up on our website. Our webmaster has been ill and is going to be out of commission for a little bit. As soon as he gets back on his feet, then we'll have him put up on our website the information about these different conferences and workshops. So on the May 23rd through 25th in Dallas, we are going to talk about heart rate variability and bioelectrical impedance, oligoscan measuring heavy metals through a spectrophotometry test on the hand, thermography, infrared imaging thermography, computerized regulation thermometry, automated electrical screening, cortical metrics, EEG brain mapping, vocal cord stem cell therapy. We'll talk a little bit about connection therapy, infrared sonotherapy, laser detox, photonic focal detox, structural therapy, German neural therapy. This is what previous attendees have said about the workshop. Now, Dr. Norm Shealy has been at this a long, long time. he came down to one of our workshops last year and said that after that workshop, that was by far the best conference he'd been to in 62 years since he finished medical school. So that was quite a compliment to us. So do mark your calendars for the next event, which is the Mitochondrial Rescue there in Orlando, Florida. And there's the phone number where you can register. And then also, mark your calendars for those other events, and you can get more information about those events by sending an email to info@ACM Connect, or in the next couple of weeks, we should have our webmaster back in the saddle so he can put that on our website. You can just look at it there. All right, so time for questions. We had some great questions that came in on the chat here on the right, so I'll go through those. One question was, what is the difference between carnosine and carnitine?
Well, carnitine is actually a carrier molecule that allows the fats to be converted into fatty acids and be carried into the mitochondrial membrane to allow energy production from fat. So that's more of a carrier molecule for that particular reason. They do have the carn prefix in it, which means that they were originally discovered in meat, but their functions are vastly different. My money's on the carnosine.
Yeah. And there's a question about someone said that they had heard of acetylcarnosine. I haven't heard of that. I've heard of acetylcarnitine, but I didn't know that there was acetylcarnosine out there.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. Someone also said that that there was something that they read that one of the carnosine products might be antagonistic to vitamin A. Do you have any knowledge about that or comment about it?
I don't, but I can check into it. It's really been shown to have no adverse drug reactions, and it's made in the body, and I'd have to look into that.
Okay, yeah. Also, someone wanted to know if there's been any anecdotal cases or research, either one, on peripheral neuropathy with carnosine.
I'm sure there has been. If you were to go to carnopedia.com, there are about 2,000 different articles on it. I would imagine that it would definitely help from a lot of different fronts, especially the diabetics who have the neuropathy, because their mitochondria are just not functioning very well. And obviously the mitochondria need to get down to the axonal synapses to allow things to happen. They travel down the nerve cells. So I would imagine that it would help, but I'm not familiar with those studies right off the top of my head. I'm sure they exist.
Mm-hmm. Also, you mentioned that there's a study being done now on multiple sclerosis. Do you have any idea about how long it'll be before there's some publication that comes out of that?
Well, it was completed in July, so I do believe it should be coming out in some published scientific journal shortly. But it's a completed study.
Oh, excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Oh, yeah. One attendee was asking about how well the carnosine crosses the blood-brain barrier.
It's amazing. We're finding that certainly with cases, if you think about Alzheimer's, if you think about autism, where there's very little going on in the brain or where it's very damaged, we are having tremendous results in old people and young people. We know it definitely crosses the blood-brain barrier, and the results are tremendous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of people that do have neurological disease, whether it's kids with autism or people with Parkinson's or MS, ALS, all those folks do have some disruption of the blood-brain barrier, so maybe that helps getting more of it across. It's great, great when we get something across that we want to get across, rather than just the stuff we don't want to get across.
Absolutely.
Also, what's the range on the therapeutic dose for, let's say, a child with autism versus a patient with Alzheimer's?
Basically, I've been looking after children as young as 2, and I would generally start them with 1 capsule morning and evening, which is broken into their food. But it's on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes when they get up to about 5, we might be bringing them into 2 carnosine capsules morning and maybe 1 in the evening so that they sleep. But some children's bodies, they just hoover it up, and you can be giving them much bigger doses. The same with people who are very, very old. I tend to start slow, and you're measuring them on a regular basis, so you can see where the dosage should be. We start most people, older people, on 2 carnosine morning and night. But I've had cases where they've had much, much bigger doses, 3 carnosine morning and night, 4 carnosine morning and night. It really depends with the management of the case and what they're presenting.
Yeah. Since the carnosine does increase the energy production for the cell, do you think it's best to not do it too close to bedtime?
The carnosine isn't so much the problem. If you think about carnosine as regeneration, so having it close to bed isn't too much of a problem. It has a tiny bit of CoQ10 in it. We tend to put it with our special potentized Q10. That's where the problem arises. So we have to make sure it is taken far enough away from bedtime. Most people take it by 7 p.m. It's not a problem. We do occasionally have our pixie dust clients who are super sensitive, and we tend to suggest they take it a little earlier in the afternoon. But the carnosine being taken by 7 p.m. doesn't normally interact with people's sleep.
Mm-hmm. The next one asks about accessing the product. Will that be just through those that are able to attend the training so that they can understand exactly how to do all this?
Basically, we want as many practitioners as possible to be practicing so that it is more available. We like to do a test on people. Dr. Raja, as I'm in the UK at the moment, but Dr. Raja can certainly see people in Florida, and we are hoping to get as many people trained as possible so we can roll this out across the US. Mm-hmm. But if anybody who needs it, if they email Dr. Raja or myself, then we will certainly make sure we can get it to them somehow.
Oh yes, please give us one of your emails right now.
Well, mine is Dr. Raja at mitochondrialrescue.com, and we have product available right now.
Yeah, Dr. Raja at
mitochondrialrescue.com, right? Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Lilius, yours?
Lilius at mitochondrialrescue.com.
Okay. Good. Someone was asking if you have some information, educational information already on YouTube.
Not at the moment, but I'm hoping to rectify that very soon.
Okay, good. The next person was asked if you have any information about how this might improve the stem cells that are given for, let's say, brain recovery.
I think it would be a great adjunct to many things, including infertility. I think it would be great for stem cells. There's a lot to study here. I am positive with the kind of mechanism of action these molecules have that it would improve for sure.
Okay. Well, we're a bit over time, so I don't want to drag this out. I'm so sorry that we had the difficulty getting things started this morning. We did the practice run a few days ago, and everything worked perfectly. And then when you get to the real show, then nothing works, right? Someone said, we know of Murphy's laws and Murphy's correlates, so someone said that Murphy was obviously an optimist because things usually turned out worse than he predicted. Yeah. So anyway, if you're able to come to the training in Orlando, do sign up for that there at that phone number that's on the screen, the 407-988-2334. And Anthony will be editing this in the next couple of days and try to get it up on the website. So if you missed the beginning of it, you can go back and listen to the beginning of it on the archive on the ACIMconnect.com website. All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Raja. Thank you, Elias, for giving us great information.
Thank
and
you.
look forward to having more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to meeting as many of you as possible at the training.
Good. All right. Until next time, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.